Hello everyone. It's me, Chaff Commander Coffee, and we're here today with my tier list for the ancient era in Humankind. This is going to be a bit shorter than my previous tier list, so I want to get through it at a reasonable pace, and I will go into more detail on each individual culture and a little bit of how I expect you will play them, or should play them, in the ancient era in future videos. So, quite simply put, I'm going to rate one culture as the very best, one culture as the very worst, and everything else will be in between, right? I'm not going to put multiple ones at S or D tier. To also note that this tier list is entirely based on my own opinion, my own playstyle preferences, and it is based on my experiences playing single player on the highest difficulty in Humankind, right? So it may differ if you're playing on a lower difficulty. It probably will differ if you're playing multiplayer, but for single player on Humankind difficulty, this is how I would rate the cultures as they stand. So we're going to start off at the bottom. We will start off with the D tier culture, and I'm afraid, despite the changes, it's the Phoenicians. I don't think anyone's surprised by that. Having a naval unit with the current way naval units work, pretty useless. Even on like very navy focused maps, I haven't like you're not gonna have to fight an enemy fleet until you get to like the late classical anyway, and that means everyone's gonna be running around with quadrimae, so which have the same strength as the biremes. So not seeing a huge advantage to them. The extra 2 gold from merchant jobs. You don't really want to be working merchant jobs in the ancient era if you can help it. It's a nice boost, but it's not strictly super relevant. And the harbor is okay, but I feel like it should give more money. It doesn't really give enough as a stat. I mean, it's nice to get an upgraded harbor. Yeah, don't get me wrong, but it's not enough to get it doesn't put them anywhere close to the other cultures, unfortunately. So Phoenicians going to be in D. And for my S tier, as always, I'm sure this will cause much consternation with the community. Some people will agree, some people will be like, no, but that's just how it is. The Mycenaeans are going in S tier. So the one thing that really held the Mycenaeans back in my previous tier list that I explained was their district, their Cyclopean fortress kind of sucked. It got a massive buff. You can build it immediately. It can be placed anywhere. It collects industry like a maker's quarter. So it's a maker's quarter you can build anywhere. It has a good fortification value. It screws with zone of control as in movement. You can spawn units out of it as per a garrison, but it also provides plus 15 stability, which means that you build one of these in every one of your territories. It's going to provide you all the stability you need to build tall, but it also provides you the industry to start pushing out your Promarchoi, which are probably the best unit in the era, or one of the best. I'm not going to say they're the best unit in the era, but they are available at a very early tech. On the first round of combat, they're basically classical era swordsmen, so they're one-shot archers. They are very, very good at rushing cities down. They can stand up pretty decently against chariots and enemy warriors, enemy spearmen, and they will absolutely murder scouts. So the Mycenaeans only really need to be putting down a couple of Cyclopean fortresses, putting out 4 Promachoi. A stack of 4 Promachoi are going to give any AI that you border a hell of a time. And you pretty much, if you pick the Mycenaeans, you're guaranteed to win your first war. Their legacy trait is useful throughout the entire game. Reduced land unit cost is great. Extra experience on units just gives you that little bit extra combat strength to help fight AI stacks. It is provided via experience, which isn't quite as good as the Hittite bonus, but it comes with the land unit cost reduction. And the Cyclopean Fortress is just an amazing ancient era district. So Mycenaeans getting the top place. Getting the top place. Right, and the rest of the list I'm just going to go through in order. The Assyrians, whilst they did receive some buffs, unfortunately they're going in the C tier. The Assyrian Raiders got buffed. The Assyrian Danu got buffed. Their cultural ability got buffed. However, despite all of these things, they just don't match up to the other cultures very well. The Danu is really nice because it does give influence, and you can build it in every territory, and there are some good strategies involving that. However, the best strategy involving that is going for liberty, um, like ideology, because that adds influence to your emblematic quarters. So you build Danu in your territories, they produce influence, and then you can go towards liberty by selecting the professional army civic. That normally pops up really early, so you should be able to guarantee you can get it pretty early, or picking some events that move you towards liberty. So you're now generating 4 influence on the Danu. However, that only counts if they are attached. So I'd love to see it if the Danu actually gave more influence whilst not attached. That would make them a bit better, but currently, not so great. However, it does allow you to put up a bunch of effectively free, quote unquote free. You don't have to spend industry to build them, and they don't affect your stability. And they are basically just a free garrison to pop units out of. They're nice defensively, they're nice offensively, but they're not like special. They actually don't count as garrisons as well, which I feel like if you want to make the Assyrians better, all you have to do is tag the Danu so that they are tagged as garrisons. They act as garrisons, but in my most recent game, I picked the Goths as the Assyrians, and the Danu weren't getting the +2 influence that Goths give to garrisons, so they don't actually count as garrisons, which means they also don't get affected by garrison infrastructure. So I'd really like to see that. I think that would make the Assyrians a lot better and not be overpowered. Assyrian Raiders got buffed. They're like 21 strength now. I think they're 21 strength. They're very solid units for rushing early on. They come out very, very quickly. Very good for pressuring people's outposts. Unfortunately, on the Humankind difficulty, even up against warriors, they struggle because the AI gets +2 combat strength. So they'll still win, but they're not quite as oppressive as like the Mycenaeans are when it comes to doing a rush. So I think the Assyrians are very nice. Funnily enough, I think the Assyrians are actually better for playing a more defensive cross raider playstyle, whereas the Mycenaeans are much better at playing a very aggressive all-in style. So yeah, and their unique bonus, whilst the land movement speed is really nice, the +5 quote unquote combat strength when raiding, that's only added to the calculation for how long it will take you to raid a location. It doesn't actually give 5 combat strength. It would probably be a bit too powerful if it did actually give 5 combat strength, but at the same time, it also has very little effect because it doesn't give 5 combat strength. So yeah, I mean, Assyrians just don't have enough going for them. I still think they're better than the Phoenicians because the Danu is more useful. You can ramp up your early influence production pretty quickly with Danu, and the Assyrian Raider is a lot better of a unit than the Byroom, so they're better than the Phoenicians, but not by a huge amount. Next to Babylon. Now, if I wasn't going to put the Mycenaeans at S tier, Babylon would be going in S tier. So instead they're going in A tier. Right, so let's talk about Babylon. The astrologer's house is pretty good. It's not insane, but it's pretty good. Okay, and if you can get a couple of them down, it means your researchers are going to partially pay for their, or they're going to partially feed themselves because it gives food to research jobs. What this leads to is being able to keep your people on research and have a slightly higher population beside, which is quite nice. You can get through text pretty quickly. The Sabu Sakasti is an okay unit. It does a stand-up job of defending your cities or fighting off cav. You can even use it if you get rushed by the Huns, and it's not even terrible. It's still not great, especially considering on Humankind difficulty, Huns will still roll over Sabu Sakasti really easily, but it's not a bad unit, and it actually outfights warriors, so it's pretty decent, but it's kind of expensive. So it's middle, and the legacy trait is not actually very good on Babylon. It's +2 science on the capital for each tech research. It's a very marginal amount of science. However, so despite these things being fairly marginal or mediocre, or rather, the only really good thing being the astrologer's house being pretty powerful, why is Babylon A tier then? Well, it's simple, really. Babylon is A tier because they can research texts from the next era. This allows Babylon to go for swordsman rush. If they don't have any iron, but they do have 2 horses, they can go for a horseman rush. They can tech for siege warfare, which allows them to get ballistas, which are an incredibly good siege unit if you want to besiege cities and take them that way. So they've got the capacity to get classical era techs way faster, which is really good. Uh, and it's probably one of the best cultures for doing a transcend run because of that ability alone. So whilst I can't put Babylon in S tier because they don't have like the same impact in the ancient era that the Mycenaeans do, they are, however, very good at playing in the ancient era and trying to farm up fame. So if you want a really good ancient era and you want to sit in the ancient era for a while, Babylon is the best in my opinion. If you have good expansion, you get more astrologers' houses down, which is great. Otherwise, you can just focus on applying classical era tech as Babylon in the ancient era, which is going to give you a massive lead. And the AI does this as well, so it works. I mean, I've done plenty of runs where I do Babylon Swordsman Rush, and it works really nicely. So yeah, Babylon's going in the A tier for me. Followed by Egypt. Egypt's going in A tier as well. Egypt gets industry cost reduction on districts, solid. Extra industry on tiles that exploit industry, solid. It's basically a legacy ability that's never bad, so it's good stuff. The emblematic quarter is just industry on industry with a little bit of influence thrown in there, but it's mostly just like raw industry, which is really nice because the 2 things you want to focus on in the ancient era is getting up your food and your industry. Primarily your industry, because it lets you get everything else up faster. If you have solid industry base, you can build market quarters in cities that you want to produce money. You can have science quarters when you finally get to the classical, so you can build research districts and then make science. Or you can build more farmers' quarters and then have more population. Industry is always the thing you want to focus on first, and Egypt is an industrial civ, so they can focus on industry. The Markabata is a really solid archer unit as well. You don't get an upgraded archer unit classical, which I hope changes eventually, but you don't get an upgraded classical era archer, so you've got to make do. And the Markabata is a 24 strength archer with a hit and run ability. They're kind of like budget Huns, I guess, if you treat the Markabata like that. It's actually pretty good. So yeah, solid unit, solid perk, and very good district. So they get A tier. I don't put them in S tier because their play style is inherently more passive. And on the humankind difficulty, the best way to start snowballing is to snowball as early as possible. And the best way to do that is to be knocking out your neighbor so you can claim more land for yourself, or maybe you vassalize them so you've got a solid income and a good source of resources coming in that you don't have to worry about. So yeah, I think the Mycenaeans are still better for that. And whilst the Egyptians are also good at industry, the Mycenaean Cyclopean Fortress actually produces more industry than the pyramid because you're free to place it wherever you want, which means you can place it next to a couple of mountains and some forests in the middle of nowhere and exploit an entire new hex of resources. The Egyptians have to build it adjacent to other districts, which means then you're kind of investing into a pyramid and then a maker's quarter and then possibly a third maker's quarter. So you have to invest in 3 districts to get a similar industrial output that the Mycenaeans get with just building 1. And the Mycenaeans get stability and a free garrison for it as well. So very solid, but not quite as good as the Cyclopean Fortress. It scales better, but it doesn't have quite as much impact as soon as you put it down. Next to the Harappans, which go in B. Solid B tier civ. They get a lot of food, which is nice. However, farmers still, because farmers aren't very effective, like the actual farmer job, it doesn't properly feed itself, which I hope changes eventually. But because it doesn't, the Harappans make up for that by giving you a lot of food. However, they're still map orientated in that you need rivers to get the most out of them. You still get +1 food on all tiles, which actually kind of what makes you want to go into fishing early, but it's just kind of what I said for the Harappans previously. They also changed the runners. The runners got a bit of a nerf. I think they reduced their movement speed or their ability to move across rivers and stuff a bit. Something like that. The runners got a bit of an. I think they might even drop their strength. I don't remember. But yeah, the runners are slightly stronger scouts, but I think people put way too much emphasis on the fact that they're slightly stronger scouts. On Humankind difficulty, runners still lose to other people's scouts in a one-on-one fight. Now, yeah, you can out-defend the AI. If it's just a pure 1v1 and they attack you, you can just like hammer defend and you'll win the fight. But you can do that with normal scouts. So Harappans are slightly better at bullying the AI with their scouts, but it's not like an insane advantage. And honestly, the canal network got. I think the canal network got nerfed too. It doesn't act as a. I'm not even sure if it acts as a river anymore. I'll have to double check that. But I remember the last time I looked at it, it was like 3 food, exploits food, 3 food for every additional farmer's quarter, and that was about it. I didn't notice anything else on it. It probably still boosts food somewhat, but it's okay. You still want to focus industry before food, but it's Harappans are still higher up on the list because food is still one of the things you want to focus on. But if I had to compare like the Harappan canal network to the astrologer's house of the Babylonians, I'd actually prefer the astrologer's house because if you get 3 of them down in a city, like you have a city attached to territories, it's quite common for the ancient era. Your scientists are providing 3 food for each researcher, which means for 3 researchers they produce 9 food, which means they're actually producing enough food for another pop. So whereas if you build 3 canal networks, you're just raw producing food. Babylon lets you keep people on science and still get extra food. So, and yeah, whilst producing food means you could just put those people on science, it's not quite as efficient, I guess, because you're producing a primary resource and you're getting food secondarily, which is quite nice. Whereas the Harappans primarily produce food, and then everything else is secondary to the fact they produce food. So yeah, the agrarian ability is really helpful to kind of slingshot yourself early on, but it does cost quite a lot of influence to use. So it's not quite. It gets more expensive as you go through the eras, but it's still fairly expensive. So it might stifle your expansion a little bit, but you will get more influence because you have more population. You do need to be worried about your stability though. So with the Harappans, you don't really want to be building too many districts because you don't have a good way of generating stability. Like for example, the Mycenaeans with the fortress, they get 15 stability on it. So that's the Harappans. Solid B tier, but I don't think they deserve an A tier slot. At least not Humankind difficulty single player. Next we have the Hittites. Hittites will also be taking up a B tier slot. +1 combat strength on units is great throughout the entire game. I was almost tempted to put these guys in A tier, but I haven't actually played with them enough to see if they outpush the Egyptians. A very rush orientated civ. The outpost upgrade they get allows you to push units out from different locations, different territories, which is good. I also found out that the Awari, the upgraded outpost the Hittites get, it actually exploits all resources. So you can put it on a mixed. For example, you can put the Hittite outpost next to a Lux deposit, and it will actually exploit the gold on the Lux deposit. Or you can put the Hittite outpost on a mixed food science tile or a industry science tile, and it will exploit the science. I didn't know that. So they can actually get slightly higher. Like if you're planning on going Hittites, you can put your outposts in like, weird. You could get different placement on your outposts for like slightly more optimal value in terms of science and gold, which is quite nice because it means you don't need to put as many people on science or gold, and you'll just have a better income. And it means you can focus on just grabbing more outposts, and they'll just produce science and gold, which is interesting. Because science and gold will go to your global stockpile even if you haven't attached the outpost. The industry is wasted, but food does go into producing population. Industry isn't technically wasted because it builds the outpost. The outpost gets set up faster if it has more industry, but yeah, generally speaking, like the gold in the science is good because it goes to the global stockpile. So that can be quite useful. But the main reason the Hittites have been pushed up on the list, and they've actually taken a spot from oh dear, it's going to feel really bad, but the Hittites got pushed up because the Gigir. Now, originally, I didn't think the Gigir was very good because it was too expensive and the suppression ability wasn't very relevant. They've actually changed the suppression ability. It now knocks off combat strength of the unit that the Gigir hits, or anything that gets suppressed actually has reduced combat strength. I think it's -3, which is actually a big deal. I've gotten so used to fighting the AI with +2 combat strength because of the Humankind difficulty that if you slap one of their units with a Giga, and these are like 24 strength chariots or something, they're not quite, I don't think they're quite that strong, but they do get the charge bonus. So if you charge a unit, they'll charge any unit in the ancient era, and also they'll do a decent job charging like even spearmen or swordsmen from classical. So they'll do a pretty good job at charging anything from the ancient era and some things from classical. And once they've suppressed it, that unit has reduced combat strength, which means your archers can absolutely obliterate that unit, or you can bring more Gigir in and just absolutely dumpster on them. Now, because they're cavalry units, they can just kind of vaguely ignore. Well, not as good as light cavalry, straight up just ignores LOC, but because they have high movement, you can get better flanking. And if you hit a warrior or something with a Gigir, and then get another Giga to go around the side and flank it, that warrior is straight up dead. So a lot of times, 2 Gigas will just one shot, or I say one shot, but 2 Gigas will kill pretty much anything the two of them hit, which is really, really good. So the Hittites have a great military advantage, and the 1 combat strength again carries on to all eras, so it's a pretty useful ability. Yeah, so solid B tier if you want to play military and you don't manage to get the Mycenaeans. Hittites are good, and the Hittites also can get experience. They can get the level 1 experience, which is the easiest level of experience to get. They can get that, whereas the Mycenaeans kind of get granted it for free. So the Hittites can end up with stronger armies if you invest in them properly. Right, next we have the Nubians. The Nubians are going to go into the B tier because I've pushed Babylon up to A tier for single player. I haven't actually been playing the Nubians very much in single player Humankind. The Nubians were really good in the scenario because you could guarantee you were going to get certain things, right? Nubians in actual random maps, if you get a kind of awful spawn without too many luxuries, again, they're very map dependent like the Harappans. If you get a spawn without too many luxuries, you're not going to get any value out their ability immediately, which is their main. That's their main power spike, is that they get luxuries up early, like 3 or 4 deposits. They make lots of extra gold from that, and they use that to then slingshot their trade. And you can't do that if you don't get any luxes. So certain random maps, you're going to just get shafted and not be able to put up any lux deposits, and then the Nubians are just kind of a dead pick. Well, I say they're a dead pick. The reason they're still in B tier is because the Tarset A archers are really good. Archers that basically ignore line of sight, so they don't receive a combat strength penalty for firing at random people, like that are, say they're standing behind your units, they won't get a combat penalty for obscured vision. They can shoot over terrain like mountains, weirdly enough, forests, etc., and they're not going to get that strength penalty. So the Tarset A archers are really solid, and they do have higher strength than standard archers, and they will make a reasonably decent unit in the classical as well. They're not going to be as good, but if you can get some XP on them and get them on high ground, they can actually do pretty decent damage to even classical era units, or just sniping your enemy's archers. That works too. So pretty solid archer unit, which is nice. Not quite as good as the Markabata though, because they just have lower strength value and they don't have the mobility either, so they're a bit squishier. And then you've got the Mero Pyramids, which is a good way to make money and industry. It's basically a maker's quarter that also exploits industry. Very nice. If you get some luxes that are a mix industry commerce lux, they're really solid to build near them. Things like dyes, silk, obsidian. I think obsidian as well. Yeah, obsidian, marble, those kinds of things. So the industry luxury resources, they're really good to put next to those, and you'll get a lot of cash and a lot of industry from that. And every maker's quarter you build adjacent to them also provides you with more gold, which is pretty handy because they're going to get their merchant stars and give you a nice pool of cash to work with going into the classical. If you want to play more aggressive, build a larger army in classical, you're going to have plenty of cash to do that. Or just get your trade up. The faster you get your trade up with the AI, the easier it is to play peaceful and pick your battles. So the Nubians diplomatically are very nice because they have all that extra gold. And also, if somebody does dow you, like one of the AI rushes up to the Huns on your borders, they dow you on a surprise war, you can just immediately offer surrender for a ton of cash, and you'll make that money back way faster, so the bankruptcy won't hurt as much, which is a relevant thing to consider. So the Nubians are good in B tier. They're a very solid, like, passive pick civ. You can be quite aggressive with the Tarsei archers, but there are better options if you want to play aggressively in the ancient era. But they're solid. They are solid, and they deserve the B tier slot for that. Next C tier slot is actually going to be the Olmecs. I bet some people are going to be surprised about this, but Olmecs are really good. The Olmecs got some nerfs. Their unit, their javelin unit, the javelin throwers, they are only 19 strength now, so the same strength as the Tarsei archers of the Nubians. But they were given a line of sight like blocker. The javelin units. This applies to the Mayan javeliners as well, but they are no longer as relevant as a ranged unit as, say, archers. Honestly, they're just slightly different to archers. They have higher strength, but their line of sight is more awkward to work with, so you have to be much more careful about how you use them. They are still good, and they still get a good combat strength bonus in forests, but if they get engaged by warriors in melee, they're probably still going to lose, especially on Humankind difficulty. They're still going to get absolutely slapped. So they're not as relevant as they used to be. The Olmec Javelins used to be really, really good. And now, on top of that, their ability got nerfed as well. It only gives 1 influence per territory rather than 2, which is still good. But if you consider that the Assyrians can get 2 influence by building a Danu in their territories, yes, the Danu cost you influence to build, but it's only like 32 on normal speed, which means it will pay itself off in 16 turns. And if you go Liberty and then you attach the outpost, it pays itself off even faster. And you're going to be playing the game for more than 16 turns, so that influence is going to add up. Olmecs, in 16 turns will have generated 16 influence, which means, after 20 turns, Olmecs have produced 20, the Assyrians have produced +8. In 25 turns, the Olmecs have produced 25 from that territory, and the Assyrians have produced 18. And after 30 or 40 turns, the Assyrians are now actually making more influence than the Olmecs. So whilst it requires no investment, it doesn't have as high payoffs. And that's not even including, again, if you attach and get the Liberty ideology, because it will pay it off even faster. On that note, though, the Olmec heads, I believe the Olmec heads got nerfed as well. I can't remember exactly, but I think they used to give more influence in the Victor Open dev. Overall, the Olmecs got nerfed pretty hard because everybody was saying they were like crazy OP, and I was like, yeah, they're decent, but they're just an expansion civ. Like, you can go punch them with any other civ. It's not like they were really strong. They were like an A tier, like I said, they were like an A tier, but I don't think they were like. Alright, did I put them as S tier? I don't remember. They were basically one of the best civs in the era, but now they're they got nerfed, and they don't excel at their role anymore as being like a rapid expansion kind of civ. This and because the Japanese got nerfed, they're not even so good at pushing people around. Like they get pushed around a little bit more, especially on Humankind difficulty. So yeah, Olmecs are solid if you spawn in an area where none of the AI are very close to you, so you can go and just slam down a bunch of outposts. But they definitely did get made less powerful. They don't snowball like they used to, so yeah, they got a lot of their power stripped from them. I can't remember the exact nerfs to the Olmec heads, but it's like it's food that produces influence, and as I said again, you want to be producing industry primarily if you can, and then anything else that you get off of the industry is secondary. So if it was industry plus influence like the Egyptians, it's great. The Nubians get industry and money, which is great. Harappans make food on food, and food is more relevant for your cities than influence, because food will produce pop, which gives you more influence. The Olmec heads give influence for every adjacent farmer's core, and it's not a huge bonus, it's like +1 or something. So you might get like a +2 off your Olmec heads. which is quite a huge investment for like a slightly over the top farmers quarter, and that's about it. Um, so yeah, again, Olmecs got nerfed pretty hard. I wouldn't mind seeing the something about them get buffed up again. I'd probably make the Olmec heads a bit better, like make it 2 influence for every adjacent farmers quarter. That would probably be enough to push them to a bit more of a reasonable standard with the other civs. Maybe even boost the javelin throwers back up to 20 strength, because now that they've had their line of sight sort of blocked a lot more harshly, I think making them a 20 strength unit is perfectly acceptable. At least they'd be on the same combat strength level as warriors on Humankind difficulty, and that would be pretty decent. Finally, we have the Zhou, or Cho. I think you're supposed to pronounce it Cho. But yeah, the Cho, I'm putting them in beta. So the Cho got massive upgrades from Victor, sort of. I say massive upgrades. I guess the meta's just shifted a little bit, but the Cho are actually really good. +2 stab on all districts is nice. The Confucian Academy gives 8 stability, which with the +2 makes it 10. So the Confucian Academy gives, but the 2 stability on all districts is useful throughout the entire game. I say throughout the entire game. It kind of falls off once you get access to manufactories in the early modern. But up until that point, it's useful. It can help you push out more districts without having to worry about stability. Or if your trade gets cut, then it's not so bad, because your stability should hold up to a higher standard because of that extra +2, which is nice. If you yeah, and then the Confucian academies, again, a bit map dependent. If you're not near mountains, you won't get the science from them, which does kind of suck. Mountains you want to be building next to for the industry that they provide, but throwing down like even just 2 Confucian schools next to a couple of double mountains, it doesn't even need to be great. Like a couple of double mountains with 2 Confucian schools is like 20 plus science per turn, and a nice boost to your stability as well, which means that you're going to get like the equivalent of having like 4 people on science, which, if you're getting your capital, attaching an outpost, and building 2 Confucian schools, and you're producing 20 plus science from them, you also have capacity for 4 scientists, which they would be producing the same amount. So either you can choose to slingshot your science really fast, or you can just have those people do other jobs, and you basically just don't need to put people on science, which is nice. That's kind of the Cho's big deal. But their even bigger deal is the Zhanche, the unique unit. I actually think the Zhanche is on par with, if not better than, the Gigir. It's probably one of the best units in the era. Early on in the game, your stab's going to be quite high. You have access to the public fountain at irrigation tech. Yeah, it's one of the mid techs in the ancient era. You get the public fountain, you get the bonus stab, you get the Confucian school stab. You're not going to have too many districts. Your stab's going to be quite high. If you get a couple of luxes as well, your stab's going to be staying at about 100. Now, whilst your stab's at 100, the Zhanche is going to be a heavy cavalry in the ancient era that basically scores about 29 combat strength, or potentially higher if you get the homeland ideology and you pick professional army. So the Zhanche can get to 28 plus combat strength, which means it will outfight anything in the era, and it will actually hold its own pretty decently against enemies in the next era as well. Because the combat strength that it has, unlike the Mycenaeans Promakoi, it's not based on being on the first turn. The Gigir, the Hittite Gigir, is based on an opponent being suppressed, which reduces their combat strength. The Zhanche is just, as long as you have high stability, is always going to have crazy high strength, and you can use it as a shock unit. It's better than building horsemen in the classical era. So if you play as the Cho and then you build Zhanche, they do perform better than horsemen from classical. Now they kind of serve a different role because the horsemen in classical are light cavalry, not heavy cavalry. I think I'd have to double check. I'm pretty sure they're light cavalry, but the Cho Zhanche, if you have high stability, is going to be an incredibly good unit. Obviously, you can't use it to siege people. I mean, you can still siege people with it as a supporting unit, but for field battles especially, you're not going to lose any field battles, and you can push people around off of their outposts very, very easily. It comes a little bit later in the era, but thankfully you have a bonus science district, so you should be able to get up to. You need to research domestication, city defense, bronze working, and then the wheel. And then after that, you normally go calendar irrigation. So it's like your first four techs, and the wheel also you want to pick up pretty early because it connects all your outposts. But as soon as you have that, if you've got one copper and one horse, then you're away with the races. So the Cho kind of map dependent because you're going to need to get mountains, and you preferably also want to have horses and copper in your starting area as well. But if you can tick all those boxes, they are an incredibly powerful culture, but they don't deserve a higher spot because they are more map dependent. And that means they're not good all the time, right? Whereas the other higher tier civs, they are good all the time. You can pick them in pretty much any scenario, and Mycenaeans, Babylonians, and Egyptians are always going to excel. The Hittites are probably going to excel more without access to certain things because they're the non-map dependent culture of B tier. But the Harappans, Nubians, and Zhou all have very solid payoffs if you have the right map for them. But that's what leaves them in B tier. They're very solid if you've got the right map, but again, I have to make a tier list based on all of my experiences in the Humankind difficulty, and I've had games with like practically no rivers. I've had games where I have no Luxors in my starting 6 territories, and I've had games where I haven't seen a single mountain for miles, right? So those three cultures in B tier, the Harappans, Nubians, and Cho, map dependent, powerful, but map dependent. So they go there. Right, guys, that's my tier list. Leave your comments if you've got any questions about how I made this or came up to these conclusions if you want more explanation. I will be showing off each of these cultures in a separate video further down the line, and a general kind of, I guess, tips, tricks, strategies sort of deal with them. Maybe some map settings you want to try them out on, or just generally what it's like on a more standard random map. I'll probably be showing them off on like a normal size 2 continent New World map, just to give people an idea of how they function. It'll probably be like a short 30-minute episode where I'll talk specifically about that culture and their strengths, etc., etc. Now, of course, it's a 4x. There are always going to be variables you cannot control and things you have to adapt to. But as a general rule of thumb, there are some things you can apply as a sort of go-to a build order, if you would. There are build orders. And I guess kind of like a teching order and a build order to go with some of the civs to give you guys a bit of a head start if you've struggled playing some of them, or you just don't really know how they're supposed to work or what you do with them. I will be doing a sort of strategy guide to each of the ancient era cultures, and I will be doing the same for all of the other cultures as well. Oh yes, um, I'm gonna do it for all of them. It's gonna be difficult because I'm basically gonna have to play a full game to get to the point where I'm gonna be playing as some of them, like especially the contemporary era ones. But I mean, I'll figure something out. I'll figure something out. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was helpful. But again, this is just my opinion. I will try to look around for other people's tier lists as well, because I think it's important to get other people's opinions about the game. So, players who might be more builder orientated, players who have different preferences or focuses in their games. I'm quite militaristic, so I prefer to rate like cultures partially on their emblematic unit. But there'll be people who just completely ignore that because they don't bother playing military very much. Or there'll be some people who have a different approach, like they focus more on um, making alliances and trade and things. Like I still do that myself, but they might be particularly interested in doing that, and they'll have a different opinion of how you would rate the cultures. So check the description of the video There will be links to other tier lists as I can find them, so you can take a look at them and compare. And get just other people's perspective on things. It's very important to have a well-rounded experience perspective on these types of things. And there's also a link to my Twitch if you want to check out the live content, as always. And I'll have another special announcement later this week. Okay, guys? Right, it's been me, Chaff Command Coffee. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And as always, take it easy, have a good one. I'll see you around.